going to open the special combined village and village trustee and municipal board meeting. I'm just going to say this just in case you find one. It is March 8th, 2018. So, obviously, we have been very busy on the water and sewer aspects of life in the village. Dan thought that he was going to be able to call in. He is away, but I talked to him about an hour ago, and he's not going to be able to make it by phone. So we're really only missing one of us out of all boards. But there are a few things to go over, and we really felt, Joe and I felt that it would be best to get everybody together in the same room, make sure we're all good with some suggestions that we have for you, as well as to go over a few things dealing essentially with water upgrades and sewer upgrades and some things that have been discussed through our many productive sessions with Kraft Heinz. So the first thing I would love to discuss is on the water aspect of life. We did get a letter from Department of Health, and Gymo can chime in whenever they feel it's necessary. We have obviously been looking at a permanent solution because our temporary solution has been quite costly. And if there's something, you haven't been here for a lot of this, or you two, please chime in and ask questions, okay? When we went through our water reserve issue over the summer, we had a temporary haul unit put in place, which essentially is a tractor trailer that filters all of the water through, can filter almost as much as we're able to take from our sources on its own. We have that operating though with 3 of our sand beds at the current time. We feel that that is a very cost-effective way to proceed in the future. The filtration speed, I'm going to call it, of our water is extremely fast compared to the sand slow filtration. They met with Department of Health on site a few weeks ago to explain to them that we were looking at moving to the haul unit as a permanent solution and a much more cost-effective way than renting the haul unit. And if it's working, I believe we've all been kind of on board with putting that unit into one of the sand filtration beds so that it was not outside, it was inside of our building. At that meeting, Department of Health informed essentially the village and our engineers that sounded great, however, wanted us to look at the byproduct reduction before he would approve us moving to this as a permanent solution. They informed him that they were looking at things that could be added to the water before it's filtered. PAC, but what's it really stand for?
Polyaluminum chloride.
Right, which will suck in any of the little particles, attach them so that they filter out better, making it cleaner water. We've discussed, the municipal board has discussed also at different meetings, looking into the spring sources that we have to mix groundwater with the surface water. So essentially, we kind of were told at that meeting that while he understands that renting this unit is not cost effective in any way, shape, or form, kind of too bad, so sad. And how are you addressing this before I approve this? So in response to that meeting, and then they sent another thing in regard to that meeting, asking about the water quality issues, reduction of DBPs, which is the byproduct.
Yep, disinfection byproducts.
So on and so forth. So in the meantime, Tom Campo and Gymo have been looking at what they can do that is stuff that is used right here in the North Country and other areas. How can we get this to work? So, because of that, and those things that we are being requested to do with Department of Health, there are a couple of things here. The first one is the email through Gymo from Mark Kester, who are the people who...
They're the same ones that implemented the original poly unit. They got it up and running.
Right, they put everything together for us. This is I'm going to call it a request, but I'm not sure that it's a request. This is essentially their RFP of how much it would cost to implement the necessary process and sampling and so on and so forth
It's basically a pilot.
to remove the TOC samples. Because we would need to do it for so many weeks to see if it made a difference in our water
Right.
before Department of Health could approve it. Kester knows the Paul unit. They know how this works in other places where they also run Paul units. So this proposal is on the table for us to discuss, approve, not approve. What did I miss with this?
You're pretty good. You got it.
You doing all right for
Pretty
physical
well
therapy so far?
I mean, it's the cost for Kester to actually hook it up, but there's also fees within inside that where they have to coordinate with the Paul Corp to get it hooked in to the unit that's there, so it'll apply the correct rates of the pack into the inline mixer, so everything works together like it should. So there's a programming portion that they have in there. That's the very first thing. Where I'm not sure if they come up or a lot of times they'll just work remotely and they'll actually write into their programming for the PLC how to implement all that. And there's another, I guess they call it it's like the recirculation mode of the actual poly unit itself. It's kind of just what it sounds like. Instead of just letting it run through the filters once, it'll take a certain portion of that water, say 30 or 40%, and run it through again. So that combined with this pre-treatment system, with the coagulant, the pack, will hopefully remove the organics to a better level. And we think that's the first step. That's the root of the problem, is having the organics in the water. So we're trying to get those out of there. So that's the whole idea of the thing. So that's the first line item, just to get Paul to program that in, and then these other fees, the 7,800 in there. I mean, I can read it to you, but you guys can read too. It's just actually wiring it up, the physical work, and getting the supplies and everything. Then you've got the chemicals that are in there, the product, and then the testing are basically the last three lines. The TOC testing is the total organic carbons in the water. So we've been testing that all along, but once we implement the system, we can continue to test, every week. And
At the site or at all of our spots that we test around the village?
well, that would be the second to last line items, the THM testing that you guys do anyways.
I think
They're
so
going to
too.
do it a little more often just to see how, basically, if it's working.
Okay.
So hopefully those levels will start to come down.
You know how many weeks they'd be running it?
It's a 3-month program that we're going to propose. And another thing that I need to mention is that we have to run all this by DOAs, so that's, we'll take this, if it sounds like a good idea to the boards. Before we go and execute it, we'll actually have to, Guyma will end up putting us through, into like a report form, submit it with cut sheets and everything, and what equipment exactly we're gonna use to Claude and Mike Tracy for their approval, so. Provided they're on board with it, I think it's a pretty quick turnaround for them to say, okay, because I did talk to Mike Tracy about it a little bit.
You said it's gonna be a 3-month program?
Yeah.
So my question is, looking on your sheet of your costs, next to the last one would be your TOC testing and THM testing. So basically, those numbers that are in those columns would be times 12.
Yeah, that should add up to those numbers on the right. I have not checked that math, but.
No, I'm just, that looks like that's
So, yeah,
per 1 week, right?
Well, 24 samples total for, at $39 each.
Well, another thing too with the testing is those, we can actually perform that probably in-house. I asked them to prepare a proposal, like soup to nuts, if they did everything. But we could, Tom and I talked about taking those over for cost savings, just because, for one, cost savings, but also because we're there and we generally do the testing anyways. We're set up for it.
Our guys can do it.
So we
Our guys can
could
do that.
potentially approve this and just say everything's approved except for the
No, I
testing.
guess what I was trying to get at is it's talking 24 samples on the one and it's talking 12. Is that all the sampling then? Is that just how many samples would be done each week? And in that case, that means that 936 would be, you'd have to go times 12, wouldn't you? I'm just, to get a better handle on what the costs are gonna be is what I was trying to.
So essentially, if it was over 3 months, it would be 8 samples of TOC per month and 4 samples per month of the THMs.
Okay, so that is the total of 24 and 12 for the 3-month period.
Yeah.
I think the wording, because it says weekly there.
Pardon?
The wording, because it does say weekly, I can see how
Yeah.
that could be confusing.
Yeah.
No, I just didn't want to come up with, because if you took those numbers times 12, it's gonna, all of a sudden it gets higher.
No, those should be the totals on the right.
Okay.
And again, I think Richie and Scott can
Yeah.
probably handle that.
Or Colin.
Right, whoever, your staff.
I hate to say it, I'm a numbers cruncher. Just,
I guess, is there questions or discussion, or we feel we're moving in the right direction?
We've got to do it.
I think so too.
This is something that we've been going to do for the last 3 years that I know of. So it's not a question of whether you want to do it, it's a question of when we do it.
Right. And if we were to do this and it were to turn out good enough before our lease was up with our
Yeah. You find out
temporary
about
unit, we could possibly not have to rent the temporary unit for a lot longer versus,
Now, as a temporary unit, we can go ahead and grab that as a full-time, just purchase it,
we would actually purchase a new one.
new one, okay?
And the unit itself, from what I understand, what we would purchase for our permanent solution, the temporary one it's like a Happy Meal. Everything's in one box. Where you could purchase the same pieces that go in that unit, but not have them in the Happy Meal box, have them spread out a little bit more on the table. If we were to put the same unit essentially in one of our beds, it could be better organized where it would be easier to get at and easier to repair. Am I right? Correct by
Right on.
So it's essentially the same thing, but just not in a trailer. It would be in the bed designed, however,
But we only have how many beds working right now?
3.
3? So we're taking one bed away and putting the pallet.
You'd be down to 3 if you remove
Down
that.
to 3, we've
Oh.
got 4.
Okay, we got 4, all right.
I think they're only operating 3 at this time, aren't they?
So too.
cleaning the other one right now?
Yeah, they were gonna resand it, I believe.
Yeah, I guess I haven't been updated on
Yeah.
that part of it lately.
They may have put it back online, but they were gonna talk about resanding it.
Yeah, I think that's what he's starting to get ready for. Because the poly unit has so much capacity, he can basically do whatever he needs to do with the sand beds.
So when it was all said and done, the Paul unit would be in there, plus 3 of the slow sand beds.
It'll still be there, yes.
So do you need a motion from the municipal board?
I would love a motion from the municipal board.
Do we have a motion on the municipal board to go ahead with this?
I'll make a motion that we go ahead with this.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Pass.
Okay. Also on that topic is the NGI. These are the people who essentially found the initial wells, Northeast Geoscience Incorporated. They have a proposal here to test the current wells that we have for field water quality parameters, essentially to determine whether it is groundwater or surface water. So it would not only test the wells that we have, it would also look at how that might affect surrounding surface water that we also have up there, because we're not sure if we take away this spring water, how that's going to affect the surface water. The cost to complete that work is $7,400.
And I think this is something that Claude was kind of interested in us doing, is exploring the groundwater sources. I think he would move ahead quicker with the Paul unit if we made a motion that we were starting to investigate groundwater sources, because that's what the Department of Health is really interested in.
Actually, can I go back really quick? Do we want to accept this proposal, void the weekly testing? Or do we want that included in this proposal?
I guess I would think you would, if I was doing it, I would execute the whole thing and just leave it an option that we can just not
Take it
do
out.
those two.
Take it out later.
Okay, sorry.
For planning purposes.
And we'll need to make the same decisions. I'm sorry, I'm going kind of out of order. But we can stay on task with this and then we can go through them.
Okay.
Sorry. 2 boards to keep track of. So I have 1 husband. So this is something also that they are looking for, is if we were to mix essentially groundwater with surface water, it would decrease the organics in the water, which would decrease the organic byproduct that we have once it's chlorinated, which shows up in our water after it's been sitting for a period of time.
So you'd entertain, does anyone entertain making a motion to go ahead with that?
This is NGM.
Yep.
That's the cost that we're going to be stuck with, so we have no,
It's something that the
Yeah, we
Department
have
of Health,
to do
yep.
we have no choice on it.
We can't have to.
Now, these are no choice.
I would make a motion that we go ahead with this work. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried.
Mayor, did you want the village board to go ahead and vote on these 2
I
items
would
as well?
love that, if you don't mind.
I'll make the motion to accept that first one by Ryan Churchill.
With Hester.
Yes, Esther, thank you.
I'll second that.
Charlie. And thank you. favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
And I'll beat Charlie to the punch. I'll make the motion that we go ahead with the recommendation from MGI.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Joe. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay,
Guess we've got enough paper now.
I know. The final thing, in all of this as well, we have a, what is it called? Emergency response plan. Trying to write things here. And that is something that's supposed to be updated every 5 years. As Department of Health was looking at this over the summer, they also feel that we should update our emergency response plan. And that's also something, whatever we change up at our water filtration plant or our sewer plant, it should be updated on a regular basis, especially if you have changes that happen. That would report like what kind of equipment we have, what kind of generators need to be used, and things of that nature. Tom reached out to GYMO to see if they would be interested in doing that. What's VA stand for, please?
Vulnerability assessment.
Thank you. And they have sent us a proposal that will cover all of those areas that are required. And it's not just for water sewer, so the superintendent, asking police department, fire department, and things of that nature.
Basically goes over pretty much any scenario that you could run into with the water system, and what you need to do as a reaction for each of those, whether it's a water shortage or even like terrorist attacks and things are in there, what you do step by step for each scenario. So that's like the ERP, and then the vulnerability assessment is a separate confidential document to kind of go over. It's just what it says, see how vulnerable certain areas are to attacks or whatever, failures.
So in other words, when you're all said and done, after the vulnerability assessment, you'll have an outline of what course to take in each case. Is that what you're talking?
And it's that's essentially what we used when we had the water going down in the reservoir. When it gets to this level, this is what you do. When it gets to this level, this is what you do. So you would essentially take our current documents,
And update it.
With whatever we need to do.
Yeah, so that would just be one example of one of the scenarios. Water shortage is what you have to do. In that case, we'd go through and update that. Maybe the tank levels were different this time, and what reactions, and even some of the other situations you run into, you gotta talk to the police department and the fire department staff to figure out, even if you gotta like truck water or something, which we had to consider when we had the water shortage, you gotta talk to those guys and see who you would reach out to, and all the different departments and everything to get a truck water.
Does the village one, I haven't seen it, but does the village one state who helps us out if we need it?
I don't know if it goes into that much detail about specific
I know some of them are,
departments.
because we backed up Casterland, Martinsburg
Right.
with their water sources, and we've done it before, helping out. We've
Right.
got tankers of water for it. So just one of ours stated that.
It can. I read through ours quick, the one that is from like 2012, I think, and I didn't see any specific other departments mentioned, but maybe that's something, it's a good example of something we do this time, and specifically mention these are 5 or 6 or more departments that we should contact.
We've even had with shortages of water in the village, they came and filled up at the co-op or at the fairgrounds when Lewis County was having issues, 3 or 4 summers ago maybe?
Does it look at, like the water we supply to the towns too?
I think it's mainly concerned with the village itself, but I mean, it does encompass whoever you service water to. It's got to be taken into consideration as well.
As a part of our system.
Right, part of the system. But I think once you get to that part of the system, you're distributing, a lot of the focus will go on like where the water's coming from. So like your source, you're gonna wanna make sure that's protected, your plant, your filtration plant's protected, things like that.
And this study is overdue, correct?
Looks like it.
Sounds like a good,
It's overdue.
2017.
Yeah, it's overdue.
Have you done these before?
Yeah, people at Guymo, we've done a few of these.
Then you would work like in conjunction with Tom on this?
Oh yeah, yep. So we have a section right in here where we talk about setting up a team,
Yes, right.
basically a village team.
Just go for it.
Number 3.
The task force.
Right on the back. Yeah, okay.
Backside.
Back top.
So yeah, we meet with Tom and then figure out who would be on the task force, like the police chief and fire chief and water plant operator. So just go over each situation, who to contact, what you need to do.
County Emergency Management Office.
I believe it.
Anybody here remember what they used to do years ago? Because they used to set them up. So was anybody, Charlie would probably know more than anybody, started being there long. Did you ever remember doing it?
Not
Anybody?
really. No, I don't remember.
I don't remember doing
Cause I
it.
used to be on the one for the Stillwater Reservoir or whatever. When they was gonna release the water, if they had emergency, they'd always call my house or me. And I don't know how I got on it, but
That was through the
Just
Black
one.
You
River.
didn't show up to a meeting, that's how you got
That
on
was
it.
through the Black River, Hudson River regulating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
they
This
used
is,
to call my house, tell me they were doing some certain test or whatever to notify people because in case of emergency, but
this is
I
something,
don't know how I got on it, but
I think all fire chiefs that were
maybe at that time.
impacted by that water flow, because it would back up Black River, Beaver River. Because they did it when I was chief too.
Maybe that's all when I was
Yep.
chief, I got my name
Yep.
on there. But I know I'm still on it. That's what I'm wondering.
Who developed the current ERP&VA?
I do not know. And it's probably in a locked cabinet in there. But this is also something that if you want to add, we can look in the office and see what we've got if people want to. Because you're having a meeting Tuesday, we're having a meeting the following week.
So this isn't something we'd have to vote on necessarily tonight, because we can do it next week after we get the information. I would make a motion.
I think that's okay to do.
That we would table that until,
Second.
So Joe made a motion to table.
I just have a question. How long are we talking about? How long a process is this to develop a plan? Or to
Well,
update
since
a
you already
plan?
got them in place, I would think probably between 3 and 4 months or even sooner than that. Just depends, a lot of it depends on just getting the meetings set up and getting people together.
Mhm.
Know how that can be.
Okay.
A lot of the information is already there. It just needs to be updated and gone through.
It's definitely a tedious process.
Short.
Right?
Thanks.
We'll probably have it printed out and uploaded in the office, but digital copies will also be available, I would think.
so we have a motion and a second. Does anybody, is
Sorry,
anybody
who
in favor
seconded?
of
I
a,
seconded it.
is anybody in favor of tabling that to our Wednesday meeting?
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
Okay. The next thing to discuss, we obviously have had quite a few meetings with Kraft Heinz. With the water aspect of life, they had sent a letter to us with different uses that they plan on using once their water I'm gonna call it water reserve, what's it called? It's water
Polish water.
recovery, thank you, is in place. Not all of that is up and running yet, however, they really gave us an overview of what water they plan to use, what sewer they plan to use. During part of these meetings, it was discussed, do we really need the Paul unit? Or do we really need additional filtration at our water filtration plant? The ultimate consensus is to be sure that we don't run into the same situation that we've run into. They obviously went through a phase of learning and retrying equipment and having to clean equipment, which was a little more than we had anticipated and probably more than they had anticipated. And if they were to use, let's say 700,000 gallons, between 5 and 700,000 gallons a day on a regular basis, we would be able to filter just enough water to keep everybody happy. It was discussed at our most recent meeting that all parties, and Joe and I were there, Tom Campo was there, representatives from Craft were there. We really do feel that the Paul unit is necessary to be sure that we can filter the maximum, because if we have a water main break and that drops, how long does it take us, one, to possibly find the leak? There have been times in the past where we haven't found the leaks right away. You know, and just different things like that.
A major fire too.
Right, a major fire. Anything, and to not have that amount to, and have to slow sand filter it to get it going. All of us were in full agreement that having a permanent solution such as the Paul unit that could filter water faster and keep us going and be able to reach that capacity that we are rated for at our water filtration plant was a very good idea. A rate increase for the water side, when we've looked at our things previously, the maximum increase for the permanent solution would be, I'm gonna say, was it a 35% total increase
30 to 35.
on water rates? But we're gonna go through the numbers again in a little bit. But Kraft was very receptive to that. They are also very receptive to being a part of the water system and understanding how the 5 streets will essentially benefit our system. One thing I'm going to mention really quick before I forget is when we do an increase in rates, something that Joe and I had discussed, and even Tom, the municipal board has been the ones deciding really what happens with the water and sewer. We're probably going to have some rate increases coming up, and we're hoping to keep them as low as possible, obviously. Even though our rates are much lower than everywhere else, we really don't wish to overcharge our residents. However, you also have to invest in your infrastructure, or it's so dilapidated that you really don't have an infrastructure. Part of that was also when we are looking at different corporations, especially large users of these systems, if we can let them know in advance, like if we could set up some kind of a plan of this is when we plan to increase our rates, this is when we plan to increase our rates, and kind of figure that out a little bit and give them as much heads up notice. That really was all that was requested, was that they understand that rates need to increase. But if we could let them know even 6 months or 9 months ahead of time, if we have a plan in effect, and I think that we can work with whether it's GYMO or him in the office to determine what we might need to get to before we need to get to it. You know what I mean? Even if it was 5% every 6 months or something. Because by the time we finish our project and we have our payment for our 0% loan for 30 years, it's going to be a couple of years. So we could even maybe work to get a little bit ahead to have that all set for when it's completed. Okay, so that was just one thing that came out of our many meetings. I think, Joe, is there anything else on the water side?
I think that's pretty much it. It's just what our plan is. We're not gonna vote on rates today, of course.
No. But just to make sure that we've shared everything that we need to share. Okay, so the sewer aspect is a little more entertaining. So with our meetings, the sewer 5 streets project, okay, so the phase 1 has been complete. They added more aeration to our sewer treatment plant to be able to treat more waste. Now we have 2 projects that we're looking to complete. One is the 5 streets project, which is part of the water system cost, and then replacing sewer lines as well as installing storm sewer that we don't have in many locations around the village. With replacing the sewer lines, one, we're replacing the 5 main corridors, I would say, throughout the village with this project, which would decrease a lot of infiltration we feel is coming into our system. When I talked to Tom on the phone today, he's guesstimating on a regular average day in the village, we probably have 150,000 gallons of water that's coming in when it's not even a rain event. He's thinking that these 5 streets, he's estimating, which we have ordered some, what are the things that go in the lines?
Flow meters.
Flow meters, thank you. That they plan on using very soon, just to be able to check now and then again later. And really use throughout the entire village to check areas. And he's guesstimating that we'll probably be down to 35,000 gallons per day from our 150 that he thinks is coming in when there's no storm event. Obviously we started that prior to corporate expansion. We also feel that that is something that needs to happen. Kraft Heinz is not really on board with being a part of the sewer system in regard to assisting to pay for 5 streets project. But they do agree with any upgrades that we need to do to our sewer treatment plant. With that being said, an agreement has kind of been reached during our many meetings in regard to charging. We obviously also decided September, October, that we were charging Kraft a unit rate versus just a cost of the sewer treatment plant.
I think it went in effect August 1st.
Is it August 1st? Okay.
When we did the motion in July, it was just start August 1st.
So previously, there was an agreement that they were billed for 60% of what happened inside the sewer treatment plant. We decided they were really part of the system. We really wanted to charge them a per rate, a rate per unit, as we did all other entities. The suggestion had been made, or has been made. Okay, first I want to back up for 1 second. When we, actually, I'm going to wait. I'm just going to write this down so I don't forget. The suggestion has been made because Kraft doesn't feel that they will use the 1.1 million gallons daily. They will be using let's say 740 or 750, they feel will really be their average use. We are building a plant though for 1.1 million gallons per day, or that's currently what their permit is for. Kraft Heinz has suggested that they pay $1.39 per unit for the full 1.1 million gallons per day, whether they use it or not.
This per day or weekly average?
1.1 million gallons per day, whether they use it or not. We then discussed, because probably in the last 2 months has not been any, maybe 1 day of surcharge for flow. Does that sound about right?
Couple more. Couple more.
I won't ask you. I think it's once over 2 months
It
was
was
a
twice,
surcharge for.
twice in January, and then February had one the day of the water break that we had to reclean
Okay.
everything due to
Because of the dirt. Or the backwash or whatever. So the other discussion was, as part of this meeting, a weekly average. Is it possible to have a weekly average, since they are essentially planning on paying for what they may need to use in our sewer treatment plant? Because essentially, the reason I wrote this down is because we had a few discussions with their engineering firm and their new pre-treatment system is much different in numbers with loading to our plant than what their current permit is through us. So currently, BOD, I'm going to tell you that that's just how thick of stuff they're sending us. Does that make sense? It's how solid or how thick it is.
Concentrate.
Thank you. Okay, yeah. So the current permit is 3,900 BOD. So we're building a plant for 3,900 BOD and 1.3 million gallons per day. That would be the phase 2 that we've been looking at with the SBR, with a holding tank. If something comes in that's too much, we have somewhere to store it so it can be processed slowly on a regular basis. So we're building this plant. Through our discussions and through just different calculations, they're sending us currently less than the 1,500, which is what their engineers had planned with their MBBR, which is their pre-treatment system. And they've not been using or really going over the 1.1 million gallons per day. So part of the discussion also was, do we need to build a plant to handle this? Or do we need to build a plant to handle this? Because you can have this as your permit, but we need to build a plant to be able to handle this. Where if this is what you really think you're going to have and this is what you really think you're going to use, this is a plant that we can have for this. So as part of that discussion, and this has something to do with the municipal board with their permits, okay? They're comfortable with the 1,500 BOD as a new permit. They currently are permitted for 1.1 million gallons per day. All right? Okay? So that they're not asking to change. When we did phase 1, it was for 1.3 million gallons per day because that was the ultimate cap. Okay, so currently with phase 1 and the new aeration, is 2.0 million gallons per day is what we can treat. Okay, through DEC. So, one of the questions is, with the go ahead, did you have a question?
No, I
Okay.
was just,
With the 139 per unit and paying for having that capacity in our sewer treatment plant, a weekly average with a tap per day is a question. If that were to be the case, we would essentially have to change our sewer use law. If we were to decide that this was healthy for our charging of them, healthy for our funds, for our future projects. The other thing that was discussed was increasing rates if need be. That is understood, that rates will need to be increased at some point in time. You know, if it was 5% every 6 months or 10% a year, if we could give them a flat, not necessarily a flat, but even like a little bit of a schedule, kind of like with the water side of things, give them enough advance notice and a schedule, they're on board with what we need to do to make things work. When you look, and I'm sorry because I left my paper at home, I thought I had it here. When you look at, and this would cover all of the bond payments and everything that we have to make. When you look at there was a chart that Mark Gibo did not too long ago with them having 1.1 million gallons of use and what they were responsible for our bond payments with old bond payments, which one of them will expire in 2024, which is about $110,000 a year. And the one that expires that we just took out for phase 1 is about $91,000 a year. When you figure this out, for the 1.1, it comes to about $750,000 a year for sewer, with no surcharges for anything. Okay? When you figure out what we figured out for the EDUs per use and the bond payments that Kraft is responsible for, it is slightly lower than that $750,000 per year. So, I think I've talked long enough. What did I miss?
I can't think of anything right now that you missed.
Can you start over again?
No.
I
We
got
felt in
one.
mediation that this was really a very fair offer, but go ahead.
I guess originally we were at $1.39 back in August.
Correct.
And the major corporation was against that number. Now why all of a sudden are they willing to pay that?
Well,
I don't care.
yeah. What do we care?
really, I don't care.
It's not that I care, I just wonder
No, I understand.
what's down the pike that I don't know
Well,
about.
and part of it also, I don't know. Part of it also, I think, is, and the other question that we did ask at mediation is this slight excess that would go into the sewer. With the surcharges, we need to use that on sewer. There are 3 things in our sewer use law that we're allowed to use that for. Specific things, and that is its own account that really is not touched, except recently, I think, for engineering for our sewer treatment plant. I think we've used some of that through that account, maybe for some of that, but there was more to be used for different things. And Pam is not here to tell me specifically, but this, I think, is also a way to contribute towards being part of the sewer system in general, as well as having a set rate that hopefully will not have to change a whole lot.
But what happens, say we're set at 1.1 million a day at $1.39 a unit. All of a sudden, something drastically changes at the corporate level, and we start getting 1.4, 1.5 million.
You still have surcharges at that point, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Should there be a surcharge on anything over
We
1
still,
point?
we still kept the surcharges, just when we made that motion. Anything over 1.1, they were gonna pay, like they
Right.
were before.
Right.
Okay.
I don't know what they've decided.
No.
It's in the
Chances
motion.
are they wouldn't, but I'm just saying what happened.
So that was another part of discussion, because I asked Mark Gibo, you know, I kind of went through what we were discussing tonight, because we're supposed to have another meeting Monday, I believe. Do we have time on that?
10:30.
It is, okay, thank you. So that is just kind of another question is, if we were to go to a weekly average, because,
We stayed away from that for the reason that they might have used 2 million one day on us, and the next Saturday and Sunday, they're only gonna use 250,000. It's not
Correct.
gonna pan out for us.
correct, well, and that's why he said a weekly average is not a bad you know, if it's something we wanted to entertain, but you would have a cap on that. Like, let's say there is a weekly average of 1.1 million gallons, but not to exceed, whether it's 1.2 per day. But if they exceed too many times, their weekly average is gonna be blown out of the water anyways. That was his suggestion, is you would still have to have a cap, because yes, you can't do 1.5 one day and 250 the next day, because that's gonna throw our plant way out of whack.
That's why we kept it as a daily thing and not a weekly average. When we made the decision, right, Dorothy?
Yes.
When we did that, that's the reason we done it.
Right.
Back to the 3,900 versus the 1,500.
Yes.
Have we made any decision on which one we're leaning towards? 1,500?
Yes. Their permit, they would be comfortable. Well,
They were comfortable dropping it to 1,500 on the BOD, which currently 3,300. Anything above 3,300, they pay a surcharge.
correct.
Their BOD is cleaned up to such an extent that they're comfortable that they would, if they did exceed it, there'd be surcharged over the 1,500.
That was-
But actually, that's putting less of a strain on the plant.
I was thinking if
Because
it
right
came,
now
to
it's
push
about-
came to shove,
It's been like
Oh, no.
750 and stuff. Am I right with that? It's been at like 750, and we've had very good numbers with their BOD.
They've got BODs as low as 182 and as high as 1,100, but from January 8th on, the figures that we have, none of them has been, most of them average, I would say they'd average closer to 500.
and that's at full production, they're not doing.
Yeah, that's during your full production.
Okay.
They put an MBBR in,
Mhm.
pre-treatment, and that has really cut down on their BOD. And their flow reduction, a lot of it is from the water saving they've done.
And a DAF before and a DAF
Because you're
after.
polishing that, right?
I'm gonna go out on a limb and speak, even though I was not approved. Our BOD is somewhere between a quarter to a half of what you're getting from normal household sanitary waste. It has been cleaned up dramatically.
And now you've got a polishing unit too, water reclamation polish.
No,
Okay, but
that starts in April.
Oh, okay, but it's in the works, right? Okay.
That's, yes.
It doesn't mean that things can't go wrong and we can't still get something thick.
So to say they're doing it now, it's
What
not
we-
gonna stay that way.
What we call as a slug.
We have
And-
to protect ourselves.
Right, and our engineers would still like to get more data, a few more months worth, especially because it's cold weather right now. See how things react also when it's a little warmer outside. But if we were to decide, I guess, make our recommendations to our board, if your board wanted to make recommendations to our board on what you think of these things, Empire State Development would love to hear that we have come up with a happy solution to make both parties happy. And we do have a meeting Monday morning, again, to discuss some wording between the two parties with our attorneys.
Any decisions that we make in reference to protecting our system also protects Craft
Oh,
and every other of our users that are a part of this entire system. So none of it is punitive, all of it is for protection of all parties involved.
absolutely.
So do you want a motion
I would love discussion.
to
I would
discussion?
love
So I
any,
think,
you know,
I think your
thoughts.
biggest problem, like with Donnie, is the weekly versus daily.
Could even be a 5-day. If we wanted to do average, it could be a 5-day average. I mean, it's really, and that doesn't have to be part of it. That was just something that was, you know, discussed as part of our conversations.
The main conversation was the 1.1 per day and the 1,500 pounds BOD, and they would pay that whether they used it or not
Correct.
at $1.39. And the price, if for some reason costs went up, that price could be renegotiated upwards. Am I wrong? That's exactly what the main discussion was.
We would have discussions just like we talked about with the water rates,
Yep.
that every so often, hey, if there's cost changes, we'll discuss it in advance, as opposed to a one-time 30% starting next month, or whatever is a sudden change instead of being able to plan for it.
And I think part of the reason they offered this, which is way more than they would be paying under these figures, is so that they can go to corporate with an estimate of how much it's going to cost them a year for their budget. Am I wrong? Is that a fair statement?
That's very correct.
And if 6 months down the road we have to refigure it, then they'd be able to get a handle on it and prepare it for their next budget. 1,500 currently, you know, they were a month ago, they were coming in with 3,900 pounds. Now they're 700, 500, 200, and they're agreeing to pay for 1,500 whether they use it or not. Which brings,
And we need to build for worst case scenario, essentially.
and the surcharges are still in effect. The surcharge rates would start at just over 1,500 instead of at 3,300. So if they did have a mishap, the surcharge would kick in.
And I agree with Donnie's concern wholeheartedly about,
Who's the same, 5 years, they ain't doing this to us again.
you know, just.
That's
again,
why you can.
And I'm not saying them, I'm saying any company that comes in,
You gotta protect,
industry.
you've gotta protect the system.
So your feeling is we should stay at the daily?
Yep.
I think so, personally.
If they're not worried and they're showing you're never gonna go over it, what are they worried about then?
Now, with the daily versus the weekly, I think I hear what the municipal is saying without really knowing what they're thinking. I think I hear them. But am I understanding this right? That there's a weekly, so say it's 1.1 million per day is the cap. After that, they're gonna have surcharges. So that weekly average, and again, we've seen numbers that it's probably lower than it was at the peak. But say they were somewhere, just throwing it out here, 500 to 800,000 per day on average for a given time. That weekly, the daily one would be 1.1 million, but the weekly one would be lower, correct?
Well, the weekly,
Because the weekly would be the average of the cap would be 1.1, but maybe it is, you know, almost over a million one day, but down to 500,000 the next.
right, so essentially, if you were to do a weekly average,
Yep.
the most they're allowed to put into our plant is 7.7 million gallons per week, right? Because there are 7 days in a
Right.
week. So let's say one day they had 500,000 gallons, the next day they had 1.2 million gallons. It would still, as long as they stayed under that 7.7 million, would not get surcharged for overflow.
Okay, alright.
However, you don't want to have days, let's say it was a 2 million gallon day
Exactly.
for some very random reason, and then 200,000 the next day, they could still be under their 7.7 average. Or if you did a 5-day average, it would be 5.5, and then weekends would be looked at separately.
So that number's just gonna be multiplied by the days. It's not
Right.
necessarily
Right.
going to be both a cap day and
Correct.
week.
Correct.
Okay.
But it's possible that a 1.3, it's possible that if they were to, if it was like a 1.2 million gallon day, that they wouldn't get charged for that. But if it was a 1.3 million gallon day, they would get a surcharge, even if their average stayed at 5.5 or 7.7.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
So you can essentially look at it and work it however you would like for it to be worked. Or you can just have a 1.1 million gallon per day. Or would you have a weekly average with a cap? So you essentially would still have a cap to be able to protect you a little bit. It just wouldn't be
I like to be protected a lot.
stringent.
I like the daily.
Okay.
And I don't think you do, Brian. Do you think you can't, you don't know whether this would jeopardize our,
Once the seal's broke, I might as well keep talking. I would say that it feels like we're getting nickeled and dimed when we're at $1,118,000 and have to pay a $500 surcharge that day, when we know there's 40 million gallons of capacity in the lagoons, and that little bit that we're over one day doesn't amount to squat in the big picture. And then on Sunday, we're at 350,000 gallons. The engineering or the workings behind it doesn't seem to add up to an offense that has upset the system. So that's why we have asked for a number of years to have a weekly average, knowing we've got one low day and the little bit that we're over the other days is not an upset to the system. That's been our thinking, and that's why we've requested it for a number of years in that line of thinking. What Donna proposed is something that we haven't talked about, but it sounds reasonable that if you said, all right, you know, Donnie said 2 million, we're never going to be at that, but 1.4 maximum per day with a weekly average of 1.1 per day, that will prevent one really high day, but still allow an average. Again, it's that the workability of the system, that a couple 100,000 gallons or 20,000 gallons has not drastically changed the operation. And if you've got retention and all of our waste and whatever is the proposed design is going to be set aside and brought back into the SBRs gradually, again, what's the harm in 1,130,000 today, and it's going to gradually be moved through. So
well,
that would be our point of view.
in the case of the scenario that Donnie presented, 2 million, and then an average of 1.1 through the week, I could see where 2 million might be a problem.
And I think there is a cap
I think if
of
we came up
1.3, 1.4, whatever. Like I said, it just feels that a little bit over the 1.1 is
Well, what's our plan set
margin of
up
error.
for a day?
2 million with everything,
Yeah,
2 million. So if
but
they,
we can get fined if we go over it.
we get fined if we go over the average of 2 million per day
over a month.
over a
Over a
month
month.
period of time.
So you have a monthly average for the DEC,
Yep,
and we have a daily average with you.
yep.
So there's,
In fact, right now the plant's putting out
Offset.
3 million a day. But through the course, and you don't necessarily get a fine, but if it happens often enough, you get a fine. I checked the plant this morning, and it was, you know, because of the high flows of water, but it's dropping quickly. I would agree that if it was way high, if we came up with a cap, it would not want to be a lot over 1.1.
Exactly.
I hear what Brian's saying, and it would upset me if I'm the company and I'm over by 50,000 gallons and I gotta pay a surcharge. But I certainly wouldn't want to give them the leeway of 3 or 4 over.
No,
I might go as high as 1.2 instead of 1.1. It gives them 100,000 leeway. Anything over that, well, that'd be about as far as I'd be willing to go. But I do hear what he's saying.
It's a bad analogy, and the chief's not here, but I think it's similar to going 56 miles an hour. You're not going to get yourself in trouble. At 65, you might, but that doesn't mean that if you go 56 a couple of days, you're not going to go down to 40.
Well, that's a good.
Yeah.
I mean, I hear what you're saying. That explanation, I understand, but we don't want you to.
Not that you've ever gone over the speed limit.
I've got it set at 56. That's why I said it.
I'm saying, and for our flow to go through the sewer beds, it's a 40-day or 44-day
depending on how much is coming.
process.
For instance, in the month of January, there was only 3 times they were over 1.1. One time it was 1.2. So instead of 3 surcharges, they'd have got 1 that month. And none of them would have come over the 1.1 for the weekly.
And the other aspect is this would give them a little leeway if we were to do this, as they're willing to, on the other side, pay for their maximum capacity that they probably won't be using other than 1 or 2 days a week.
Correct. Since August, we've averaged 710,000 gallons per day. Right now, there's a difference between a day and an average or a 1 day larger flow. But to put it in perspective, it's not 1.1 day after day after day after day.
And the
You
thing,
can't guarantee that though.
No,
Their stuff can break down and you're gonna get it all at once. Who knows?
right? Well, they would essentially be, then they would have surcharges for that day no matter what, probably.
Not if it's on average.
If you have a cap.
if you had a cap that's just slightly above their average
You'd
now.
have the average and a cap as well.
That's,
Mhm.
You'd
that's
have
how our
a daily
BOD is
cap.
now.
Yep,
There's a daily amount and a weekly average.
that's how
Sometimes we pay
BODs
double.
are figured now,
Yeah.
have been. What you gotta remember too is they're paying for 1.1 when they're using 500,000.
Or 250 on a Sunday, or,
And that's quite a bit of more revenue coming in.
it's a very stable revenue for us,
Yep.
essentially for our budgeting purposes.
And if,
It's a stable,
So-
solid monthly, we know what we're getting, not necessarily on their use, we know what we're getting.
my thought is that if we increased a slight cap and if they said, nope, we're gonna pay just for what we use, we're gonna lose money on the deal. If they say, if we don't have a slight cap and get a daily and a weekly, and this plan goes down the drain, and we just charge them for instance, on the 31st, we'd charge them for 182, you know, or for the flow was way down, you know, we wanna make sure that we're gonna keep our revenue up.
I know I looked at those break-even sheets, I think that Gamo gave us too, and yeah, when their usage does vary, it makes it hard on their end and our end.
Yep.
I'm sure for the cost estimates, this at least gives us a baseline of what we're gonna deal with, and it probably helps their budgeting purposes as well.
Yeah. So to answer, Joe, a couple of your questions before, what's changed? I would say a handful of things through the mediation has changed. I don't know if it's changed the opinion, but it has brought us together in that the village has expressed concern of revenue and what you would get towards, this debt payment, depending what we use, if it's more, if it's a lot less. Now you've expended so much money and the revenue isn't as much. One of the things that we have gained, if it's locked in at this rate for this period of time, subject to a yearly review or whatever, however that comes, we at least know we've got a steady budget number. So it's kind of like you're getting the same revenue and we're getting the same budget. One of the other things that has helped is the discussion and consideration from the engineering side of, now that we've got a couple months of actual data, to take that into account and what is the scope and how big a treatment does it need. One of the other things that didn't hurt when we talked about this 6 months ago, I don't think New York State, Empire State Development had come to the table with that dollar amount to offset it either. So as we weigh everything and where we're at, I think we've agreed on a number that gives us a little guarantee of $1 or a flow amount, $1 expenditure, with the understanding it won't change. Like when you might change the rates, what was proposed, a 35% increase that hits all at once, which is difficult on our budgeting side. It takes away your uncertainty of income. It kind of gives you something better to plan for. I know in maybe the technical meetings we've talked, as we shared with GYMO, our technical basis of design is so many gallons per day at a higher BOD, so they designed a bigger system, and that's all they had to go by. Now we've got actual numbers. I think it's been two ends to come into the middle.
Sorry. I love you too. I would ask for more discussion and suggestions. And I know we've had some discussion, but I guess what would we like to decide moving forward?
Well, I'd like to move forward on something because I don't want to sit in any more mediations.
The other thing, do you want to mention the agreement? Like we did for the phase 1. Okay.
We had 1.5, we give them 1.1, so what are they taking into the future?
I don't know if
They
we talked
want a lot more than
about
that.
the intent is.
A lot of it is what the NDR has done to reduce the BOD loading. It's something that wasn't on the table when you started this process. You designed it, you tried an NBR and then you went to an NBBR now, and it's reduced the, or you were talking about an NBR, but their final pre-treatment is really knocked the BOD down. It reduces the requirements for the upgrade of that plant quite a bit, correct?
Well, and a DAF before and a DAF after, right?
We had one before. We added a polishing one.
Polishing one after. So that also, the holding tanks that they
Mhm.
have that help.
Which is going to reduce our capital costs a lot. My personal opinion is, if we give them a cap, it's not a very high cap, something though that will reduce their number of, I wouldn't want to go to 2 million or 1.5 million, we could come up with a number, and then they're 1.1 weekly, but any data that's over that cap, because like here's a case, they're over like 45 gallons, 4,500 gallons, 1.145. It's,
Charlie suggested 1.2.
with 1.2 for a cap.
I think we were just over that the day of after the water break, and we had a lot of contamination from that thing.
Yep.
But otherwise, I think that's fair.
I mean, I would go along with Charlie if the municipal board, 1.2.
And then you're not going to get hammered with a $2 million flow. If there was $2 million, they'd be getting charged.
I understand the intent of a huge
Yeah.
1.5, 2 million, something very, very large.
How hard is this?
What's the discussion? With 1.2? if it goes over that on a daily rate, and then 1.1 for the weekly average. If it went on 1.2, if it went over the weekly average, they'd be paying it every day, you know, the 1.2, if they had 1.2 one day, 1.3 one day, 1.4. But if they had a 1.2 and it was below a 1.1, they'd only be paying for that one surcharge. I mean, that's,
The 1.2 cap sounds.
it sounds like a starting
good-
point.
A good starting point, and it allows them to have
A little leeway.
a little leeway, and at the same time allows us to not lose a lot of revenue if it doesn't hit, if they're still paying for that at 1.2.
Mm-hmm.
Because at 1.2, we get everything after that. What I want is, you know, we're gonna have, it's just doing a daily one, we are losing money, if, what I'm gathering, if they do a 500,000, 700,000, and then,
Because we're basing their payment now instead of 60% on the flow, correct?
right,
Correct.
And they're gonna pay 1.1 if they're using 500,000.
yeah, they're paying 1.1 no matter what they put out all week. Not a rocket scientist, but that sounds good to me.
Me too.
And to jeopardize that by not giving them another 100,000 for a cap, to me would be crazy.
Yeah, we give them some, you know, squeezy room.
Because if they run 1.19 for 4 days,
They're
and
still under the cap.
700 or whatever, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it goes by the average, and it would really be if you wanted to do a 5-day average or a 7-day average. Both of those were discussed. Whether you do the weekly average or a 5-day average. I personally think it would be easier if you just did a weekly average for the office to figure it out with the numbers. But that's just my thought.
And I think that would benefit Kraft at the same time. Because they probably don't produce as much on the weekends as you do during the week.
So you think the concept of a 1.2 would be all right?
1.2 cap per day.
And if it was over
Can't hear my head now.
1.1 weekly,
could not.
there'd be a
Yes.
surcharge.
Yeah.
I'd be in favor of the weekly average for that.
Yeah.
That'd be okay. Lonnie?
No, but I'm only one.
Well, that's okay. We're not all supposed to think the same. If we did, it'd be a pretty boring world. That's what I keep telling my husband, remember. You're not elected to live.
It doesn't change your concept, Donnie, but on the numbers, like we've said in some of the letters that you may have seen, when we put in our polished water, our recovery that should be in April, that should take the average back down another 100 and some thousand gallons a day. It's gonna give us more room. It doesn't change your thought of a 1.4 or whatever, a big day, but we'll have a little more wiggle room eventually, but again, it's still,
My thought is too, even if this is agreed upon and it doesn't work out, then we can always go back and change your mind or.
Well, we talked about
Figures.
annual negotiations, correct?
Right. We even
So-
said sitting down at the table on a yearly basis would be a very healthy thing.
That's what's something.
Any
we're-
updates on their end, any updates on our end? What's
Uh,
working, when do we have some issues, you know?
Which is something that should have done through all the years instead of being blocked in at 60%.
Should have been negotiated a long time ago before
Yeah.
any of us were sitting here.
Yep.
And we're-
1972.
we're fine with whatever frequency. I mean, yearly makes sense, but if it's whatever or as needed or
Mm-hmm.
upon
When is
any
your,
type of
when do you
water,
start planning your budget, Brian?
we'll usually get stuff in May and June, and it's locked in usually by the end of August or 1st of September.
Okay. So like a
So again-
February, March time would be a great time to meet. If that was to be put on a calendar or somewhere.
It'll fall in line with our budget too, because we're working on our budget about that time.
So I would make the motion that it's a 1.1 weekly average with a cap of 1.2 per day.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Carried.
Did you wanna add a rate to that?
The 1.39.
At the current rate, 1.39.
130, yeah, $1.30.
Okay. We're all in favor? Did you oppose?
He opposed, yes.
Sorry, thank you. Who made the motion, Joe, and who seconded, I'm sorry?
I did. Mr. Jagger.
Okay. Now, on the other aspect of life, when we look at 5 streets, which we'll do in a little bit with our current finances. So if you wanted to pull that up, or water or 5 streets, whatever you wanted to do tonight. I think we're more, yeah, it's really up to you. The other aspect of life is, after our meeting on Monday, we had a discussion. Jeff Tubolino was here, and he started crunching meetings towards the end of our full meeting. And Steve Hunt from Empire State Development was also here for that meeting Monday. But afterwards, Jeff, you could tell he was thinking and that the wheels were turning.
Mm-hmm. I could smell something burning.
Right? His ears started to get red though. But he also had discussed with our Phase 2 project, with the numbers of craft at 1.1 million gallons per day, and the BOD being as low as it is, it may be possible the SBR unit is not required for our Phase 2. And that possibly, he said, obviously I need to crunch some more numbers, but as he's looking at things, our lagoon system, if we were to spend some money lining it and stabilizing it, could be fine to use for a number of years further. So not to throw a monkey wrench in things, again.
But you will.
But it's another hoop. But when we were looking at this loading and this number of gallons, and we're now looking at this loading and this number of gallons, Jeff has gone back to the drawing table to really process, and obviously he would like to get some more data from Kraft in general, just to know. Is today Thursday?
Mm-hmm.
Is the new pipeline in use?
This morning.
Oh,
9:30.
oh. So we'll have that right on our skating now, won't we? Whatever's coming down.
I don't know what you have for
Should
I
be.
think so. Our phone
Should
meter
have started
and everything,
recording this morning.
I'll go down tomorrow and check.
I mean, you
right?
plan the
I'm
same.
tired.
I did too.
I was told you put the same sample out, but I don't know how much you got.
You know what, the paying attention now is way over what you're supposed to be getting.
If I was getting paid for it, I'd be in violation, all right.
So, we will have, we would still like to have some more data, really also with different seasons. Typically, well anyways, so I just wanted to throw that out there. I did speak to Empire State Development today because they've been very
Impatient or patient?
I was gonna say concerned
Yeah.
with the communication with the recent last couple of years and making sure that things are working out well between the two parties. So I did let him know that that was a possibility today, that we could probably have another design drawn up of how much exactly that is going to cost the village. But also operations and maintenance of our, essentially the plant that we currently have is probably the cheapest way to operate and maintain a sewer treatment plant.
Definitely.
Just go with the other one, just 24/7.
Correct.
That's at least 3 more
And
months.
our budget, we'll see on here, our budget for operations and maintenance probably increased by 50%
Could I
for sewer.
interrupt you for a second?
Please do.
For this whole discussion about eliminating the SBRs behind it, because the DEC is going to require, above and beyond what we figured before, a large retention structure, because the SBRs cannot handle the infiltration, or if we got a big slug from Kraft or anybody, some kind of a chemical
IBLEs.
slug.
It don't have to be just from that.
No.
Yeah, it could be from a spill on the street or anything. The cost of that would have raised that SBR up quite a bit. So we discussed using one of the lagoons for Kraft and also be able to use it if they have SBR problems and cut the SBRs down from 4 to 2. And Jeff Tubolino was sitting there, like you said, his ears were getting red and the smoke was rolling. And his figures came up with that you wouldn't even need the SBRs. Just some upgrades to the current lagoon system, and that's what he's looking at right now.
Which are not real cheap.
No, even if it
record,
costs as
but-
much to line it and reinforce it as what we planned, the original SBRs, the operating and maintenance part of it, as you guys will attest to, is astronomically less. And it would keep the rates down quite a bit.
So just to let you all know, there's still some figuring to do. Still some more discussion to have on I'm gonna call it a permanent phase 2 solution. But really wanted to, and like I said, Jeff really just said, I don't wanna, I'm kinda going out on a limb here, but I gotta share this with you guys because when I'm crunching my numbers here, this is, but we know what we are doing, well, we hope we know what we're doing with our water solution, if we're given permission to do that. We know what we would like to do with our 5 streets project. So we have one more entity of really figuring out what we truly 100% need and a cost associated. So. I'm gonna go ahead. Before we leave, we need to have an executive session for property easements for our 5 streets project.
Do you want to we can go through them quicker than we did before, just because I think,
Actually, you know what? Our board, do we want to repeat that motion that was made
Which motion?
for the 1.1 weekly average, 1.2 cap daily at $1.39 per unit for
I'll
the
make that motion, Mayor.
for the full capacity?
Yeah.
I'll second.
Joe?
That's Charlie.
Oh, sugar cookies.
It's a long day.
Hey, I've done really good at not messing anybody's name up the whole way down. Charlie, Ed seconded.
Just don't call me Dan, otherwise I'm gonna resign.
Remember that. Don't call me Dan. You heard it from him.
Don't call me Dan.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye, aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Sorry. Okay. Go ahead, boys.
So you guys, I was just gonna say, we can go through it a little quicker, because everybody's kind of seen it before, right? I don't know if you wanna just go.
Yeah. Even if they haven't.
Well, let's just go with any changes from the budget, I guess. We had an existing debt placeholder in there on the top.
That's the one to be paid off in 2024?
Yeah, and that could be lower by now, because when we originally did this sheet, it was 8 months ago now. But anyways, we left that in there for the placeholder existing debt. And next one down, 5th Street sewer. So this is one we need to talk about. As we went through with the process with Tom, reviewing all the drawings, going through, I don't know what review you want to call it, the DPW review. We originally had the 16.2, but as we went through the process, you know how Tom is a candy store, but we had to add multiple things going through, whether it's a valve here, water lines, sewer lines. There was a lot of adds on East State Street, just because we were originally from, I think, Highland down. It was originally supposed to be just a sewer down to the pump station. So that a big chunk of that East State from the bridge up to that Highland is basically being redone now, just because we were tearing up the sewer, and you got the water in there, and then you wanted to add some catch basins with the storm line. So that's kind of how everything compounds. But anyways, after we went through that whole process with Tom, we re-looked at all our numbers, and before we had like a 16.246 budget number. Right now we're at 18.584 now, so it went up a little bit. Percentage base. I'm not saying $2 million, it's not a lot of money, but that's where we're at, and that's the sewer portion, 12.196 right there. The 2.7 there is your EFC Clean Water Grant, so you take that out to the next, you get your next green number, the 5th Street Sewer with grant. So that's your net cost updated right now for 5th Street Sewer. That's the
Can I ask a really quick question on that?
Yep.
So we got a certain percentage of our clean water grant. If we increase for storm, can we increase our percentage that we got from that grant?
No, that's going to be your flat rate grant. I don't see that going up. I wouldn't plan on that happening though.
Even though we had a little bit into another part of the project, can that be applied back to this?
I don't think you're going to see. You're thinking the same thing that when we went through with the ESD, aren't you? The percentage based. I don't think that same rule of thumb would apply here.
Okay.
So that's that line 6 right there. If you want to highlight it, Kev. That's where we're at for a cost for 5th Street. So we'll plug that number into some of our scenarios. But just going right down through real quick, the next one you're looking at the phase 1 cost. It was originally at 3.8 mil. You had the grant worked in there for the 953,000. So the next one down is your net cost for phase 1 wastewater upgrades, about 2.9 mil. And then some of these other numbers are just placeholders we put in there that we have to calculate for the yearly breakout. Line 11 though, your phase 2, we'll have a scenario for the phase 2 solution. When we originally had the full gambit, the SBR system and everything, we were at that number, the 16.2 million. So for a lot of the calculations going forward, when we met with Craft Monday, we basically decided that we would keep worst case numbers in here, because hopefully the numbers will come down for the total cost of the project. We won't be at that 16 million, but we didn't want to throw that in there and throw everybody off just in case it ended up being at 16. That kind of comes into play with some of these other grants we're looking for, because it's kind of percentage based. I think we're looking at upwards of, correct me here if I'm wrong, the full 7.2 million perhaps would get worked into this. Or we'll leave it at the 6.
I think he said 6, but we were
Well, we
still
have
trying to get
6 in here,
7.2.
That's where that is. This additional grant, we're just calling it. We have a $6 million grant put in there right now. Let's see what else here. So anyways, line 17 is your net cost. Once you recrunch everything, phase 2 cost, incorporate grant monies, you're looking at about 8.9 million for that capital cost. So those are kind of our budget numbers that will plug into these other scenarios. And then your usage off to the right, as we talked about, we now have the 1.1 million over there which, as we know, we've seen from previous scenarios, that has a huge effect when we were constantly plugging numbers in, going up and down and everything. But now that we have a solid number to work with, it makes things a little bit simpler, hopefully. So, what scenario do you want to look at? Just 5 streets for the first one? Of $1.39? Just to show what'll happen there.
Yeah.
So this one plugs in the total debt for the 5 streets up on top there, 12.73, which also includes your existing debt that we looked at from that previous sheet. And that just breaks it down like we've discussed before in previous sessions. You got your annual debt service, you got the O&M numbers in there, and in the yellow you got the $1.39 rate that we're hopefully going to be going forward with. You got your 1.1 million gallons up in the corner, and you plug all those in, and you're on the positive side, keeping the residential rate at $1.86 per unit. Does that make sense?
So essentially, amen. Right? If I offended you, I apologize. But essentially, with the flat rate from our largest user staying the same, the sewer rate staying the same with all other users on our system, we still have a yearly surplus, which is typically what we try to budget, because we like to put money into reserves for future equipment, and we like, so even if we were to have to raise rates a little bit for somebody, it shouldn't be. We are able to handle our 5 streets with the current revenues coming into the sewer, including our current operations and maintenance of our lagoon system, okay? Payments out. So.
Do you want to look at the next scenario with phase 2? I'll let you talk through it.
You want to? I'm not sure. Come on, let's end on a happy note today. Okay, fine.
When did we want to go into executive session? For this or for the next?
No, for, to discuss 5 streets.
Okay.
Easements, yes.
Okay.
Which I'm gonna remind me to ask you guys to stay, just so you know who we're going through, or
Yep, we'll stay.
the ones that we're looking at with
Sure.
Margito. You can go through it if you want for the next, but this really looks really good. Now, water, did we do the water yet at all? With the Paul unit, and obviously the permanent solution with the water side is much better scenario than the renting the unit, right?
Yeah, the renting the unit's not sustainable, so we'd have to figure something out.
Right. But it did have an increase. We did apply for some grant funding. I believe it was for the water side, right? And that was the one that we just got denied again.
We're talking about 5 streets water?
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't get a grant on that,
For
but
the Paul unit?
I think since I talked
Did
to
we
Jeff
apply
Switch
for Paul
today.
unit grant?
No, but I think we will. There's EFC, the WIA program. It's a Water Infrastructure Improvement Act. There's one more round coming up, and I was talking to Jeff Smith, and it actually makes sense given that DOH is making us study all these things we talked about earlier, with the pre-treatment and everything, studying the wells and things. To just, if he's going to make a study of that, do an engineering report, we might as well submit it to EFC and see if we can get some money. We're going to be doing all that work anyways. And since we've got letters from DOH and a few others, might be enough to get us a grant. Or at least try. So you want to switch over to water now then? On this?
No, that's okay. Let's do the all projects, worst case scenario. So when we look at everything with the $16 million, the 5 streets, the total debt, as you can see up at the top. Now, part of that is the old debt, like 1 point whatever million, that'll be paid off in 2024. But this includes the 5 streets, the $16 million sewer treatment plant, plus our old debt.
Plus phase 1.
Plus phase 1, yes. Rates obviously would be required to change, as you can all see, with a very small yearly surplus. Yeah, at the same time, if you look for EDU, that line 13 there, and this is gonna, this is gonna sound really silly, but when you look at our EDU, if you use the average amount of water in your household, with this, your rate would go up $40 a year, which is essentially $20 every 6 months. My personal house does not use 1 EDU. I don't even know how many EDUs we use. I'd love to know though, if I can name them per child. So my rate would obviously increase more than $40 a year. But your EDU would be going from the $132 per year to the $171.35 a year. And honestly, if we really needed to sell this to our residents, an increase of $40 or $50 a year for the basic household for almost $22 million worth of projects. When you break it down, and if you had to sell it, I think you could. I think we all certainly pride ourselves in having very low water rates, very low sewer rates. But at the same time, you can't have rates so low that you can't fix things when they really do need to be fixed, or upgrade if you have some amazing expansion in your community. So and that is with craft gallons per day coming into the sewer treatment plant at the 1.1.
You want to talk about the O&M? Why? Remember we ran this scenario before with the full gambit, and it was kind of crazy what we would have to do.
Yeah.
But we've run it again, like you were saying earlier.
Yep.
This assumes you're going to have basically the lagoon system.
Right.
So your O&M number is a
With the
lot
same
lower.
operations
It's like a
and
fraction of
maintenance.
what we had in there before.
Do you
So
still have the old one?
Yeah, so the old O&M number was this 1 million,
That's with the SBR system.
and so now with just the lagoons, it's about $600,000 less a year,
So that's the driver there.
Whether it's repairs or sludge removal that happens a few times a week, 24/7, running the plant. That's a huge jump if we were to be able to continue to keep our lagoons. And I don't want to get anybody's hopes up, but I'm hoping. And we also need to look at because right now we are rated for 2 million gallons, and any of this is going to have to be approved by DEC. But let's say that we have 1.1 from Kraft. The rest of the village gives us 400.
about 300.
So 300. So let's say 400. Just in case my kids take a couple extra baths. So we have 1.5 per day. We're allowed to have 2 million gallons in our current plant the way it is.
That's what its limit is right now. I think it's designed to handle a little more than that.
I wanted to say 2.2.
I think it's like 2.2. But currently, that's what we're settled at for our permit is 2.
So we still have, but if you go above, is it 85% of your capacity, DEC comes knocking. What are you doing?
Yeah.
What's next? you know,
So we're quite a ways away from that,
we are.
depending on infiltration, that's what we're talking about.
Correct. You know, we've had to just open up and Mill Creek is right there and we've used it.
Not very often, just one
No.
time while I was there just recently. A lot of plants do that a lot.
Yeah, it's not anything that, you know, when there's an event, some kind of weather event, you find that everybody around you ends up doing the same thing because otherwise you're gonna overflow.
That ain't good.
Hey, by the way, those balls I was talking about, they're biodegradable.
I still wish you wouldn't flush them down the toilet.
I didn't do it yet. But anyways. So just so everybody can see, you know, I don't know whether you call it the writing on the wall or, you know, this is where we're possibly at in the future. But hopefully we'll have a lot more detail over the next 2 or 3 months, you know, and even more numbers to be able to analyze and know what's coming in and make sure all systems are a go. So
You wanna talk water?
we're all here.
Just wanna feel,
You want me to do it? You want to do it?
you're the pro.
You're really gonna go home and be like, man, she talked a lot tonight.
No.
So, okay, so our existing debt and that payment, I have a picture of that on my phone when that is paid off. Do you remember when that's paid off? It's not very far away.
We had one we were paying off this year.
I think 2019 or something.
Is that one right there, the 228?
Could be,
Either 18 or 19 one is what we paid off. And the last
2019
one,
water project, we pay $78,000 a year. Last payment is 2019, so we probably have paid 1 or 2 since then. Yeah. Some water, anyways. 5 Streets water portion is $6,400,000. We have not received any grant for our water side of the project, but I think we all very well agree that you have 3/4 of the street torn up. It's really silly if you don't replace the water lines at the same time.
Well, we had that line 5, we had a existing water fund transfer in there before, but we took it out because it's kind of being used up by the temporary unit now.
Correct.
So we didn't want to lean on that and assume that was going to be there.
Right.
So we took that out, and that kind of hit this side a little bit too. And plus, actually the big thing too was the craft usage we're plugging in here now. I think before in some of the scenarios we were plugging in like 850 because they're using like some of their big days were upwards near 1 million gallons a day. So I think we said, okay, we'll use 850. But our recent talks with them, they've been saying, was it 580 or something like that?
Once everything's in place.
Right. So that's what we plugged into our scenarios. Do you want to do the scenarios?
yeah, sure.
Keep going.
So temporary,
I guess do permanent.
yeah, so basically for this permanent one, I mean, I guess kind of hit the high points. Existing rates are over here on the side we're paying right now, basically. Need to be about 30% increase for both craft and residential users.
And that 194 and 212 includes the 10% that we just increased?
Yeah, that's reflecting right now. So kind of like similar to the sewer, it would be about $40 extra for average residential user.
And that's with the permanent Paul unit in place.
Yeah, we got a $2 million placeholder on that right now.
Because that would include some of the engineering to, so the unit cost though was not 2 million, was it?
No.
But that would be for installing it, hooking it up, possibly adding the pack stuff. Is that included in that as well, or no?
Yeah, that's actually kind of minimal in the overall scheme of things.
Okay.
It was like 1.1 or 1.2 to buy it, like get it delivered
Yeah.
to you, but then you gotta like, hook it up and everything. So we just put a $2 million placeholder in there because we didn't want to sell ourselves short in the cows. So again, it could be lower. It's kind of like the sewer scenario. We got the $16 million project cost in there, but maybe it ends up being 10. We don't really know. So we don't want to sell ourselves short and show something too low.
So that's what this 8.6 million number reflects. 5 streets and 2 million for them.
2 million for the Paul unit.
But I mean, one thing that can come into play too is, like we have the 580,000 gallons per day for craft, but I mean, I guess I'm not aware, but what are the current usages like of craft? What are you guys averaging right now? Does anyone know? I mean, last I knew it was like 750, 850. So I mean, I gotta think they're gonna come down slowly. So again, that's like a conservative number to throw in there. It's not like that's not what they're using right now on average, I don't think.
I can't remember.
But also, just for the record, that only gives us a $42,000 surplus, which our reserves that we've also had for 20 years building up have really been quite well utilized over the last 2 years. Well, you know, this one essentially with the Paul unit, that's quite expensive. With the sewer side of things, some of the reserves that we've used for the cost will come back to us when we get our bond finalized. We'll get some of that money to be able to put back into those accounts that we necessarily didn't have to use, but that we paid out of pocket for initially to keep things going.
700,000 right now.
So,
I mean, how long do you think it'll take to get down to that 5.8?
The new silos come on the end of March,
So it's
sometime in April.
makes sense to plug that low number in there. I mean, we went through this before. If you change that 580 to a 750, it just makes a world of a difference. Well, that's why it's important to know good communication with these guys is key, so you know what to plug in your budget, in your spreadsheets. Do you want to look at the temporary one? Or is this good enough?
I don't think we need to. I think we all know that it's necessary right now, but it's not financially functional
Right.
for an extended period of time.
I did talk with Jeff Smith today about it and just asked him what he thought we had for options. He said even though we might not want to buy it and keep it for the permanent solution, maybe we buy it anyways and then just sell it later because the rental is so high. You basically pay for the thing in like 3 years. So he said, well, why don't you just buy it? Then we can set up, amortize it over say 20 years, but then once you get the permanent solution set up, he said just sell it. You might be further ahead. He said somebody will buy it. So that was his recommendation. He said we should maybe look into that.
That's an interesting concept.
Yeah, because there was quite a market for those things.
Well, what are we paying? $35,000 a month?
$360,000 a year, so.
30,000
Yeah,
dollars.
exactly.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So good during hurricane season, correct?
Yeah.
August, sell it in
That'd be
August.
great in Texas and Florida.
We were ready to pick this one up the day after the year. It's already out.
That's an interesting concept.
Yeah.
Yeah, timing worked out good, like a week before.
You can basically pick how long you want to amortize it, but that's something he'd have to like crunch numbers and figure out what the best way to do it is.
Makes sense.
Because if we were to purchase it, they were willing to take a little bit of money off because we rented it anyways, right?
Yeah, I
Not
can't remember
really.
there was a certain cutoff date, but I gotta think, if you went back to them, they'd negotiate.
Yeah, I think it was December, but you're right, there was a discount or
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Yeah, but we have the unit through August, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember, we passed an email around, there was a certain cutoff, I don't remember, like,
About the first of the year, December 1st or
Something like that.
December seems to stick in my mind.
But I think they would re-offer it. you
But
would
still,
think.
that's an interesting concept, isn't it?
It is.
I guess everybody should think about that and maybe bring it up at your Tuesday board meeting, and maybe you can look into that a little bit.
yeah, I can just email the guy and see what's on the table.
Just don't sign the elections in the end, we don't do anything for
Didn't
it.
hurt to ask.
If it sits for a period of time, is there anything you need to do to store it before you sell it? You just keep it running until you sell it to make sure that it's.
There's a certain cleaning process you gotta put it through before you store it, so.
Is it a lot different
I
than
don't
what we
think it's just
currently
one of
do?
the ones they probably gotta do the CIP, clean in place with the caustic and the citric acid and all that. Just gotta clean it, basically, before you put it away, just like anything else.
So put it away essentially would mean leave it right there until you sell it.
Right, yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, I'll email the guy and see what he says.
Thanks. Okay. All right. Anything else on that aspect of life? The other thing, just so you know, because we're not actually charging per unit for our sewer, we will have to create a law that would charge, let's say, bulk user. Mark Gibo was gonna try to entertain himself and create something that might apply that we should have on our books, because we aren't necessarily charging our sewer per unit, but we're charging per capacity, because that's a little bit different than what we currently have. And he has something, I would absolutely forward it to you guys first, and then see what happens after that. So we're good with all this? Overwhelmed?
Not like the first night I was here.
Were you overwhelmed since it's your first time, Mike?
Oh, I was
Our
back in November.
trajectory.
So we were going through 50,000 different.
Oh, that was like a lot.
Yes. Let's plug in this amount, boom.
So I would make a motion, actually, I don't know if we each need to make a motion maybe, to go into executive session to discuss easements in regard to our 5 streets, because it has to do with possible negotiations.
Where the public
Contract.
disclosure could jeopardize.
Correct. Sorry, I wrote it down on my piece of paper that I took.
Last time I remember was when we were thinking of buying the 4 corners, so let's not do that.
Because it's real estate acquisition, let's put it that way. I think
Well,
that was
whatever you
the-
said, I'll send it.
Thank you, Charlie. All in favor from my board?
Right.
I make a motion, the municipal board go into executive session.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?